האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening. Dobro V'yetcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon. On Parshas Mishpatim, we're going to do section number 11. That's Os Yud Aleph. Before we get into the words of the Zera Shimshon, we're going to take a look at three psukim, which are very important to understand in order to be able to grasp the ideas that the Zera Shimshon is going to share with us. So let's take a look first. Perek Chaf Daled Psukim Tes in Yud. And this is what the psukim say. Before I read the psukim, exactly when this incident happened in the Parsha and what exactly it means are the subject of great debate amongst the Meforshim. And so it's a little behind, it's beyond our scope to get into all of that, but it is important that we at least read the psukim and understand what they seem to mean. Here we go. Vayal Moshe v'Aharon, and Moshe and Aharon went up. Nadav v'Avihu, V'shivim miziknei Yisrael, along with Nadav and Avihu, who of course were Aharon's sons, and 70 of the elders of Israel. Now pasuk Yud. Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, and they saw the God of Israel. V'sachas raglov kema'asei livnas hasapir, and under his feet, that's a capital H, under his feet, it looked like something made from sapphire tiles, you might say. Uche'etzem hashamayim letohar. And it was like the essence of the shamayim in terms of the purity of the color. So those are two psukim, and I highly recommend anyone who is struck by the unusualness and the mystery of those psukim to take a look in our Parsha, of course, and to study the whole section there, and you'll see that there are, as we mentioned, a lot of different ways and possibilities of understanding what's happening and when it's happening and what exactly the people saw. Now, let's move ahead to Parshas Kisisa to look at another pasuk that's very important for us tonight. This is Perek Lamed Gimel pasuk Chaf. Vayomer lo suchal liros esponai. Hashem is talking to Moshe and he says, you are not able to see my face. Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. Because a person cannot see me, an adam, a man cannot see me and live. That is what Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu. And now let's take a look. In Sefer Yeshaya, this is Perek Vav Pasuk Aleph, and this pasuk says, Bishnas Mos Hamelech Uziyahu, during the year of the death of Uziyahu Hamelech, the king Uziyah, Va'ere es Hashem Yoshev, and I saw Hashem sitting, Al Kisei Ram Venisa, on a mighty and uplifted throne, Vishulav Mileim Esahechal, and the feet of this throne filled the temple, the Beis HaMikdash. So on the simplest level, and the simplest way of understanding these three psukim, we started with a pasuk in which it seemed to say that Moshe and Aaron and others saw Hashem. Then we looked at a second pasuk in which Hashem said to Moshe, you can't see my face because no person can see me and live. And then in this third pasuk, Yeshaya seems to say that at a certain point he saw Hashem. So the three psukim would leave us with a question, which is, can a human being under any circumstances actually see Hashem? And if so, what does that mean? And if not, what do the psukim mean that seem to indicate, the first and the third of the psukim that seem to indicate that there were people who saw Hashem? So the Zera Shimshon is going to get into that issue and some related questions. Os Yud Aleph, section 11, Parshas Mishpatim. Yevamos Perek Daled. The Zera Shimshon opens with a Gemara in Masechta Yevamos in the fourth Perek. The Gemara here is describing a dialogue between Menashe HaMelech, the wicked king Menashe, and Eliyahu Hanavi. So, I'm sorry, and Yeshayahu Hanavi. I'm sorry, between Menashe and Yeshayahu Hanavi. So the Gemara picks it up. The Zera Shimshon picks up the story right with Menashe making an accusation, a very serious accusation against Yeshayahu Hanavi. Moshe Rabcha Omar, Moshe, your teacher, said, Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. A person cannot see Hashem and live. Ve'at amart, and yet you, Yeshaya, you said, V'era es Hashem, you said that you saw Hashem, v'chule, etc., Yoshev al kisei, sitting on a throne, v'chule, etc. So Menashe was making an accusation against Yeshayahu that he seemingly contradicted a statement in the Torah in which Hashem said to Moshe, and Moshe recorded faithfully, of course, that a person cannot see Hashem. But yet Yeshaya the Navi said he saw Hashem. So that's a problem. Omar Yeshaya, so Yeshaya said to himself, Yadana Bey, I know about him. I know enough about Menashe. De lo mekabel ma de emole. He will not accept that which I say to him. Meaning, Yeshaya had an answer and a response to give to Menashe, the wicked, the evil king. But he thought to himself, if I say it to him, he's not going to accept it. V'i emole, and if I say to him, L'shave mezid, then I will be turning him into an intentional killer if he in fact kills me, as opposed to one who would be shogeg, an accidental killer, or at least a killer under some kind of misunderstanding. So the Gemara relates that Yeshayahu, on the incredible madrega and level that he was on, chose not to give a response that was a valid and legitimate response to Menashe, because he thought Menashe wouldn't accept it, and if he wouldn't accept it, then it would be useless to give it to him, especially because it would turn him into an intentional killer once he heard the response, and he still went ahead with Yeshaya's execution, and Yeshayahu did not want to do that, did not want to turn him into a misguided, change him from a misguided killer to an intentional killer. V'chule, etc. Mikol makom koshu kiroi ahadodi. So the Gemara says, nonetheless, even though Yeshaya seemed to have an answer that he didn't give, but for our purposes, the two psukim do seem to present a contradiction that we need to deal with. We have a pasuk in which, from the Torah, in which Moshe says, no one can see Hashem and live. And then we have a pasuk in Yeshaya in which Yeshaya says, I saw Hashem. So what do we do with that, the Gemara asks? Kedetanya, the Gemara answers, we can answer as it is recorded in a brisa, Kol ha-neviim nistaklu be'aspaklarya she'ena me'ira. All of the prophets saw their visions through a lens that was not clear. Moshe Rabbeinu, Olav Hashalom, nistakel ba'aspaklarya ha'me'ira. Moshe Rabbeinu, in distinction from the other Nevi'im, saw his visions his nevuos, his prophecies, in a lens that was clear. Ad kan lishono. That's a bit of a cryptic answer. The way Rashi explains the Gemara's answer is as follows. Moshe Rabbeinu had such clarity in the messages he received from Hashem that he was able to see and to understand that a person could not see an image of Hashem actually and survive that experience. And therefore, Moshe understood that anything that people thought they saw in terms of some kind of image of Hashem in any way, that was not real, that was not actual, and Moshe understood that. However, other Nevi'im, including in this case Yeshaya, thought that he was seeing an image of Hashem and thought that that was possible to some extent and whatever that means. And so that's what he said. So the Gemara suggests that it was Yeshaya's limited ability to see things as clearly as Moshe Rabbeinu that led him to mistakenly say he saw some kind of image of Hashem. And Moshe, with total clarity, with a higher level of clarity, was able to say no one can see Hashem and survive that experience. Ad kan Lishono, until here is a quote from the Gemara in Yevamos. The Kosvu Tosfos, the commentary of Tosfos on the Gemara says, Lishavya Mezid, what did it mean in the Gemara that Yeshaya did not want to turn Menashe into an intentional killer? Pirush Rabbeinu Hananel, an intentional murderer. Pirush Rabbeinu Hananel explains, Sherotzo lehashivo, that he wanted to respond to him. Moshe namiksiv, regarding Moshe, it is also written, Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, and they saw the God of Yisrael. Ad kan Lishono, until here is the quote from Tosfos. So now we're bringing in that the third of our three psukim. Actually, this was our second pasuk, but two have been mentioned, and here's the third one in terms of being mentioned in the Gemara and now in the Rabbeinu Hananel. So Rabbeinu Hananel suggests, what was this answer that Yeshaya could have given, but he chose not to give? It was to defend himself, so to speak, to Menashe and say, you're claiming that what I said about seeing Hashem contradicts what Moshe taught in the Torah about the impossibility of seeing Hashem. But nonetheless, there's another pasuk, which apparently he would say to Menashe, you're not taking into account another pasuk, in which it says that Moshe and Aaron and Nadav and Avihu and the Zikanim saw Hashem. So therefore, I'm allowed to say I saw Hashem if Moshe and Aaron and the other people involved in the incident saw Hashem. If that's what the Torah says, then how can there be a problem of me saying I saw Hashem? That's where we are so far. Next paragraph. All of the commentators ask, where did Rabbeinu Hananel know to say, or where did he get the information to say, that Yeshaya wanted to give a different answer, a new answer to Menashe, meaning different than the one in the Gemara. How would Rabbeinu Hananel know that? The Gemara only brought the answer that it brought about the different lenses. How did Rabbeinu Hananel possibly know that actually Yeshaya wanted to give a different answer, not mentioned in the Gemara? Dilma ha'yerotze lomar lo masheteretz hashas. Perhaps Yeshaya wanted to give the answer that the Gemara gave to the question about the seeming contradiction between the psukim, and that had to do with the difference between Moshe's clear vision and the vision of all the other Nevi'im, which was vaguer, which was not as clear. Lechalek bein Moshe leNevi'im, and that was to make the distinction between Moshe and the other prophets, bein aspaklarya la'aspaklarya, between the clear lens and the less clear lens. So the Zera Shimshon brings a first question here on the comment made by Rabbeinu Hananel brought in Tosfos, and that is, how would he ever know to say that answer when the Gemara gives a different answer? Why did he depart? Why did Rabbeinu Hananel go away from the answer in the Gemara and introduce a new answer that isn't in the Gemara? The Ode, another question, the Lefi Terutzo, top of the next column. According to his answer, Mashma Sherotzo Lomar Lo, it implies that Yeshaya wanted to say to him, Shegam b'Moshe ksiv vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, that also regarding Moshe, there's a pasuk that says they saw the God of Yisrael. V'im kain, and if so, leka tu lahakshos liyeshaya, then there's no longer a reason to ask a question on Yeshaya Hanavi, she'omar hefech divrei Moshe, that he seemed to be saying the opposite of what Moshe says. You can't really ask the question on Yeshaya, why did he say he saw Hashem, if there's a pasuk, another pasuk in the Torah where it says Moshe and a group of other people saw Hashem. Shahare Gam Moshe Amar Kain, because Moshe also said this. So if it was okay for Moshe to say it, it should be okay for Yeshaya to say it. Umeata, and from now, Rabbeinu Hananel Soser Dide Adide. An additional problem is that we have an apparent contradiction between what Rabbeinu Hananel is saying here and what he says in a different place. Shahare B'Kedushin Perik Beis, because in a Gemara, or on a Gemara in Maseches Kedushin in the second chapter, Perush Rabbeinu Hananel explains a statement in the Gemara, and the Zera Shimshon doesn't quote that statement. The statement is that if a person translates a pasuk, or we might say certain psukim literally, then they should be considered speaking they should be considered as telling a non-truth. They can be called a liar if they translate certain psukim literally. And how does Rabbeinu Hananel explain that? Zera Shimshon. This is a quote from Rabbeinu Hananel. A person who translates a pasuk in its literal fashion. Kigon, for example, V'yiru es Elokei Yisrael. Let's use as an example, Rabbeinu Hananel says, the pasuk that we know, that we read before we started the piece about Moshe and Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, etc., saw the God of Israel. So if a person translates that pasuk into Aramaic as follows, V'chazu yas Elokei Yisrael, and they saw the God of Israel, meaning if a person translates that pasuk literally, harei badai, then that person should be considered a liar. So the Rabbeinu Hananel says this is a good example. He uses this as an example of how someone who translates a pasuk literally can be lying. Dishchina mamish lo ra'u, because they did not actually see the divine presence of Hashem. Dichsiv, how do we know they didn't see it? Because of another pasuk, ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai, that says a person cannot see Hashem and live. Elohachi misar gaminan, but rather Rabbeinu Hananel says this is the way to translate the pasuk about Moshe and Aaron, the people seeing Hashem. V'chazu yas yikara deloka de Yisrael, and they saw the yikara, the glory of Hashem, the God of Yisrael. That's how you should translate that pasuk, not that they literally saw Hashem, because that would be impossible. Ad kan Lashono, until here, is a quote from the Rabbeinu Hananel. V'im kain, if so, pshate dekra, the simple meaning of the pasuk, divayiru es Elokei Yisrael, they saw the God of Israel, eino rotze lomar shero es Hashem. It doesn't mean they saw Hashem. V'hodra kushas Menashe leduchta, in which case Menashe's question returns to its place forcefully. His question comes back with a vengeance. Shemoshe Amar, because Moshe said, Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai, a person cannot see Hashem and live. V'Yeshaya Amar va'era, and Yeshaya said, I saw Hashem. In other words, unless there's a different way to explain Rabbeinu Hananel's words on the Gemara in Yevamos, brought down in Tosfos, then we have a couple of problems. One is that where did Rabbeinu Hananel get the information that he got? And two, he contradicts himself, because in his explanation on the Gemara in Yevamos, he says that Yeshaya wanted to use the pasuk about Moshe saying about Moshe and the other people, the group of people seeing Hashem, and understanding that apparently literally, that they saw Hashem, and the Yeshaya could defend himself by using the words, I saw Hashem. However, Rabbeinu Hananel himself on the Gemara in Kiddushin says that uses that exact pasuk to say that's why we can't translate psukim literally, because of course they didn't actually see Hashem. They saw the glory of Hashem, but that's not like actually seeing Hashem. So we have some problems, and obviously in understanding what Rabbeinu Hananel was trying to say and what he was trying to explain. Next paragraph, bottom of the column. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, Devadai lo ne'ela mi Menashe, it certainly was not unknown to Menashe, haterutz, the answer, vehachiluk, in the distinction, bein Moshe l'shar, between Moshe and the other Nevi'im, the other prophets, be'aspaklaria. Certainly Menashe, the Zera Shimshon says, knew the difference that the Gemara suggests as a way of answering the apparent contradiction between the psukim. Certainly Menashe understood the distinction between Moshe and the other Nevi'im, and knew that Moshe saw things in a clearer way than the other Nevi'im. Menashe haya chacham gadol, because Menashe was a great Talmud Chacham. Menashe was a person who was tremendously knowledgeable in Torah matters. Kemoshe Amru Zichronu Levracha b'Sanhedrin, as Chazal teach us in Masechah Sanhedrin. So the Zera Shimshon says it doesn't make sense to think that Menashe wasn't aware of the distinction between Moshe's way of receiving messages and prophecies from Hashem in a clearer way than the other Nevi'im in a less clear way. That Menashe certainly knew, the Zera Shimshon says. Ve'od, and more so, shebelow Yeshaya, without Yeshaya saying those, making that distinction to Menashe, afshar hachachomim hayu yicholim l'taretz lo koch. The other Chachamim who were alive at the time of Menashe could have given him the same answer. In other words, this was information that either Menashe knew himself, which is most probable, or if he didn't know it, it was information that was easily accessible to him. It wasn't some kind of deep, hidden, secret answer and some kind of recondite information that only that Menashe was unaware of. So that can't be true. Elavadai tzarich lomar, but rather we must say, shemenashe hayamaksheh liyishaya kusha acheres. Menashe must have been asking a whole different question to Yeshaya, de lo shaykh ala pasuk, that is not connected to the psukim in the way that the Gemara seems to be connecting them. Ela dafka liyishaya levado, but no, it's a specific question on Yeshaya himself. So the Gemara feels like the two psukim seem to contradict each other, and that's why Menashe asked his question on Yeshaya. Zera Shimshon is saying here that can't be the right way to understand things, because that gets us in, we have questions and problems with that, and that gets us into trouble. So therefore, it must be that we have to go back and look at the Gemara and realize and try to find that Menashe was actually asking Yeshaya a different question than we originally thought. Next paragraph. Ve'hachi daik lishna de Salmuda, and this is referenced in the fact that the Gemara used a very specific, careful language. De ka'amar, when it said, Mikol makom kosher keroi ahadodi. Nonetheless, the psukim contradict each other. V'lo ka'amar mai havale Yeshaya lememar le. The Gemara didn't say, although it could have said, what can Yeshaya do? What could Yeshaya have answered to the question that Menashe asked him? So the Gemara chose not to put its statement as if the question of Menashe to Yeshaya needs an answer. Rather, the Gemara said it's the two psukim that come out of their dialogue that we need to understand. Because this proves that the answer about the distinction between Moshe l'shar Nevi'im, between Moshe and the other Nevi'im, eino ela lefi ha'emes. That wasn't an answer that the Gemara was saying Yeshaya should have given, but rather it was an answer to say, if we're looking at two psukim and we have a seeming contradiction, this is the truthful way, the true authentic way to answer the contradiction. And the answer was that Moshe was talking about the way things look to him with his tremendously higher level of clarity, and that's why he said no one can actually see Hashem and live. And Yeshaya, like all the other Nevi'im, had a less clear understanding and less clear vision, and therefore he said that he thought he did see an image of Hashem. Aval kushas Menashe, but the actual question that Menashe had on Yeshaya, in hachi nami, we must concede the belav hachi nami ise. Even without the Gemara's discussion, it still applies. So the Zera Shimshon has taken us in a new direction, a novel direction, in which the question that Menashe asked on Yeshaya has not been clearly understood. And certainly it hasn't been answered, because he is now arguing, Zera Shimshon is now telling us, teaching us, that the Gemara was not dealing was not trying to answer the question that Menashe asked on Yeshaya. The Gemara was trying to answer the question about the two psukim to the general reader. We have two psukim. They seem to contradict. How can we explain the psukim in a way that it resolves the contradiction? That's what the Gemara was doing. However, we are left still not understanding exactly what Menashe was really intending to ask Yeshaya, and exactly what his answer would have been, or I should say could have been, had he not chosen to refrain from answering. Next paragraph. Ve'od, and another thing, deminale Yeshaya de'ilemole lishave mezid. How did Yeshaya know that if he would have given his answer, it would have changed Menashe from a inadvertent or a misguided murderer to an intentional murder? De'im ha'emes, because if it's the truth, sheMenashe lo haya yodea adayin chiluk zeh, that Menashe actually did not know the distinction shel Moshe l'shar haneviim, between Moshe and the other Neviim. If for a moment we say, for the sake of argument, Menashe did not know that distinction, ve'achshav haya Yeshaya omer lo, and now Yeshaya would tell him that distinction and say to Menashe, the reason that I said I saw Hashem is because I have a limited vision as compared to Moshe in the Torah, who said people can't see Hashem because of his clearer understanding and his clearer vision. Let's say Yeshaya had said that to Menashe, because Menashe wasn't aware of that distinction. Hello, is it not true, af im lo hoya Menashe shomealo, that even if Menashe would not have accepted that distinction, would not have listened to him, v'lo haya mamin, and he would not have believed what Yeshaya was saying, lo haya nikra mezid, he would not be considered an intentional murder, even if Yeshaya had explained the distinction. Shahare onushu, because it's as if he was acting against his will, lefi svaroso shesover she'ein chiluk zeh ba'olam, because his reasoning that he reasoned, meaning Menashe, told him that this distinction didn't exist. Ve'eno chayov lahami liyeshaya, and he would not have been considered obligated to listen to the explanation that Yeshaya gave about this distinction. Mipnei shetalmud chacham she'omer davar halacha, because we have a principle also in Gemara Yevamos that says, if a Talmud chacham, if a Torah scholar makes a statement in Jewish law, im kodem maaseh ba, if he makes that statement before an incident involving the halacha has happened, shomen, then we listen to him. V'im la'achar maaseh, but if after an incident has actually happened, and that incident is one that somehow would involve or connect to the Talmud Chacham, and now after the incident, the Torah scholar comes to state his opinion, ein shomen lo, ein shomen. We're not obligated to listen to that opinion, because the opinion would not seem to have the level of objectivity that's required of a Talmud Chacham when he is being a posek and stating a matter of halacha. If he made his statement after an incident happened, which again is an incident specifically that involved him in some way or reflected upon him in some way, we call that nogea badavar. If he was connected to the incident in some way and he comes afterwards and states a statement of halacha about the incident, it's not something that we do not have to accept his view. And the Zera Shimshon says that's the exact case with Yeshaya, who did not have to accept the viewpoint of, that's the exact same thing in terms of Menashe, who would not have been obligated to accept the opinion of Yeshaya about the distinction between Moshe and other Nevi'im, because he would be, Yeshaya in that case would be responding to a question from Menashe that had already been posed to him, and one in which his life could very well have been at stake. In fact, the Gemara tells us that in the end, Yeshaya was killed by people acting on Menashe's behalf. So not only was Yeshaya's life theoretically at stake, but it was actually at stake, and he ultimately was killed by Menashe's servants, according to Chazal. Ve'al korchach, next paragraph. Ve'al korchach tzarech lomar, and we are compelled to say, shemenashe in hachinami shehaya yodea chiluk zeh, that Menashe certainly knew this distinction, as the Zera Shimshon argued previously. The im kol zeh hayemaksheli Yeshaya, even though he knew the distinction, he still asked a question on Yeshaya. The Yeshaya hayulo teretz acher, and Yeshaya therefore perforce must have had a different answer. Yeshaya couldn't have given the answer about the distinction, because we're now saying Menashe certainly knew about that distinction and still was asking about why Yeshaya did what he did. Velo nasan lo, and Yeshaya did not give Menashe the answer, the other answer, a different answer that he had. In order not to turn him into an intentional killer. The kashalon, and after all of this, the real problem boils down to us. Mahu zeh hateretz v'hakushya. What was the answer Yeshaya could have given, and what was the question that Menashe was actually asking? So let's pause here for a moment, because the Zera Shimshon has certainly taken us through an adventurous journey and through different sources and different ways of understanding the sources and the Gemaras involved in the commentary of Rabbeinu Hananel. So it certainly can be a little bit, it can be understandable if our heads are spinning. So let's pause here to understand that the Zera Shimshon just kind of said, in a way, everything could have been a little confusing, but now let me tell you the bottom line issue for us, and that is we have clearly demonstrated, the Zera Shimshon has demonstrated, that our original understanding of what Menashe's question to Yeshaya was and what Yeshaya's answer could have been, our original understanding has been refuted and rejected. It cannot be true. Neither our understanding of the question nor of the answer. So now our problem is, what was the real question that Menashe asked Yeshaya, and what was the answer that he could have given but refrained from giving? Next paragraph. Umishum hachi teretz Rabbeinu Hananel. Because of this, meaning because all the things we thought before were wrong, and we now realize we need a new explanation, that's what Rabbeinu Hananel was actually coming to provide and to explain. Sherotza lohashiv lo, that Yeshaya wanted to respond to Menashe and say, the degam b'Moshe ksiv vayiru. Also regarding Moshe, the pasuk says, and they saw Hashem. Klomar, this means to say, the kushis Menashe hayisa. The real question that Menashe asked was, mishum she'afim nomar sheyesh chiluk bein Moshe l'shar haneviyim. Even if we concede, even if we say yes, and we accept that there's a distinction between Moshe and the other Nevi'im, the Aspaklarya and Moshe had a clear lens, V'chule, etc., and the other prophets did not have a clear lens, even if we accept all of that. Im kol zeh, nonetheless, lo hoyu lo lomar loshon va'era. Nonetheless, Menashe argued that Yeshaya should never have said the words, and I saw Hashem. Shehu hefech haloshon she'omar Moshe Rabcha, because Menashe said to Yeshaya, this is the opposite of the language used by your Rebbe Moshe. Sheloshon zeh nosein mokom litos. This language that Yeshaya used of I saw Hashem could lead to people making a mistake. Lemisha ena yodea chiluk zeh, specifically someone who doesn't know this distinction about Moshe and the other Nevi'im. The Yomru, and those people might say, Sha'ata godol mi Moshe. Yeshaya, you must be greater than Moshe, because Moshe said a person can't see Hashem and live, and you said you saw Hashem, so you must be greater. V'shachas v'sholem ein Moshe emes. And what's even more concerning, God forbid, people might come to the conclusion that things that Moshe said are not true. And this, of course, would be a problem for our whole system of Emunah and the Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu was the absolutely perfect, faithful dictator and medium to give us the Torah from Hashem. But this could raise a question, because people could say, Hashem said, Moshe said people can't see Hashem, but Yeshaya said he saw Hashem. Maybe Yeshaya is greater. Maybe he can do things that Moshe couldn't do. Maybe Moshe didn't get it right. And it was on this issue that Menashe judged Yeshaya as being liable to the death penalty. So that's really what was going on. Menashe was saying, I understand that in reality, you saw things on a lower level than Moshe. But my question is, even so, how could you use a language that might lead people to mistakenly think you were saying that you actually saw Hashem when Moshe said that's impossible? That's what Menashe's question was. Next paragraph. Vishaya hayoyocho letaretz lo. Yeshaya could have answered as follows. Shegam loshen zeh amar Moshe. Moshe also used a language that implied people saw Hashem. And here's the quote, Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, and they saw the God of Yisrael. Af al gav she'eino raya mamish, even though it's not an actual seeing. Deha misargaminon v'chozu yas yikara delakad Yisrael, because the correct way to translate that pasuk, as Rabbeinu Hananel specifically explained to us previously, is, and they saw the glory of Hashem. They didn't see Hashem. They didn't see the Shekhinah. They saw the glory of Hashem. Whatever that might mean, that's what they saw, not Hashem. Uvahachi lo kosha imkra dechi lo yirani. And therefore, there's no problem with the pasuk of a person can't see me and live. Right? Hashem, when he said to Moshe, a person can't see me and live, meant you can't actually see Hashem, but people could see the glory of Hashem. Ve'im kain, and if so, af ana nami amina. If so, Yeshaya could have said, I am also allowed to say, va'era es, that I saw Hashem, meaning I can use words that seem to indicate I saw Hashem, just like Moshe, just like in the Torah, it seems to indicate that Moshe and the group of people saw Hashem, but we know it doesn't actually mean that. Dahainu yikara de Elokah. This actually means the glory of Hashem, seeing the glory of Hashem. Vahainu aspaklar yosheinu meira, and that's the less clear lens that I, as a person who's not on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, I perceive things with. Im kol zeh shayach lemeimar ba va'era. Nonetheless, I can use the term I saw because that was the term used in reference to Moshe and other people, not just Moshe, other people as well. Uvazeh divrei Rabbeinu Hananel olim hacha v'hosim b'signon echad. Now, through this new explanation that the Zera Shimshon just gave us, we can understand how the words of Rabbeinu Hananel no longer contradict each other, and they can be the words that he said in one place can fit nicely and complement the words that he said in the other place. So we're good with the whole Rabbeinu Hananel problem. Umenashe bevadai lo haya misratze bazeh. And to go back to the original Gemara in Yevamos, Menashe certainly would not have accepted this answer of Yeshaya as to why he was allowed to say that he saw Hashem. Sheyiyah reshus Yeshaya, that Menashe would not accept that Yeshaya should have the authorization, lichtov haloshon shekos of Moshe, to use the same language that Moshe did. In such a situation where people could easily be led astray. And that's why Yeshaya chose not to give any answer to Menashe, in order not to turn Menashe into an intentional murderer, meaning that Yeshaya was willing to give up his life without trying to save it, without attempting to save it, by giving a valid explanation to Menashe, because he understood who he was dealing with, and he knew Menashe would not accept the answer, the response. And also, he thought if I give it, it's not going to help me. It's not going to save me, but it'll end up turning Menashe into an intentional killer. And he did not wish to cause Menashe, with all of his other sins, to have that intentional murder of a Navi Yisrael, a Navi Shabi Yisrael, on his head. So the Zera Shimshon has, as we've often seen, started with what looks like a Gemara, a little piece of Gemara that perhaps we felt like we could easily understand, or that it wasn't too complicated. And then he added the Rabbeinu Hananel commentary, and then went through several steps to show us that everything we thought of that Gemara was saying and Rabbeinu Hananel was saying had to be incorrect. Then he offered us in these last two paragraphs a whole new explanation of what was really going on. And now we see things in an aspaklaria ha'ma'ira. We see things in a much clearer lens than we did before we started the piece, or at least hopefully so. Yasher koach to joining in the learning this week in the Zera Shimshon. We look forward, God willing, to learning on next week's Parsha together in the Zera Shimshon.